Hello and welcome to Africa Today. I am Esther Omokwariola. From the hillsides of Freetown to the shores of the Nile, down to the breakaway points in the Delta where River Niger empties into the Atlantic Ocean, extreme weather patterns and erratic climate change conditions have become a growing source of concern across Africa in recent years. Torrential rains, thunderstorms and floods going overboard on residents undercover paints a worrying picture of the situation in parts of Nigeria with overflowing water encroaching into homes and having a hard time receding. And so we ask, what are your thoughts on the concerns with flooding in Nigeria and parts of Africa? You can join the conversation and share your thoughts with us on Twitter at TVC News NG. We take a report, and Africa Today will continue. Welcome on board.
Rising water levels in Amasoma is a cause for concern for the people of the community. From the river and rainforests, the waters are flowing into their homes, destroying property and posing threat to lives.
That of 2012, it was October 1st that the flood entered the community. But with the way I'm seeing, this one is a bit more threatening than that one, because I think this one is going to be worse than the 2012 flood that entered the whole community.
Properties are being lost already. At least we are appealing to the government. Even not just the government alone. If there are NGOs that can support too, let them also come down and see how they can set up committees to even go to these houses that are being flooded and see what they can do for the students, because they are the leaders of tomorrow. So let the government please come to their aid.
The State Emergency Management Agency is already thinking of a temporary abode for displaced persons.
We have identified higher grants and where temporarily we can keep IDPs. So we have identified that. So Monday we'll discuss how we can come down to clear the place, fumigate the place, so that we can take any IDP down to that place.
Keto Woko is the Bayelsa Assembly representative of Amasoma, Otwa and Amatolo communities.
NEMA should go round to ascertain the damage, the displacement, the flood, has done. So I will want them to, hasten up whatever actions they have to do to alleviate those that have already been displaced from their houses. Without delay, they should make sure they release relief materials.
Flood waters are rising as more inhabitants move to higher grounds.
Welcome back. Observers are expecting the worst, with heavy rainfall in parts of the country not slowing down after an assessment by the Nigerian Red Cross Society showed that more than 1.5 million people are already affected. So far, the federal government has declared a state of emergency in 4 states and put 8 others on surveillance. Now, joining me to look at the concerns with flooding in Nigeria and parts of Africa, I have on Skype renowned environmentalist Desmond Majekodunmi. I also have Philip Jakpor, media officer, Environmental Rights Action Friends of the Earth in Lagos, Nigeria. Good to have you gentlemen on the program.
It's a pleasure.
Right, let me begin with you now, Desmond. Looking at this matter critically and from the eyes of an environmentalist, what are the major causes of flooding?
Well, floods come naturally. The earth has always had floods. But the challenge that we're having now is the severity of the floods. And why we're having such severe floods is obviously we're having much heavier rainfall. And it's just an indication, it's one of the classic symptoms of climate change. It's not rocket science. You apply heat to water, it evaporates. You apply more heat, it evaporates more. So you're having far more rainfall. I mean, in certain situations, you will have the amount of rain that would normally fall in 3 or 4 weeks. It can fall in 1 day. And this will overwhelm every natural, every man-made system. And you will have the floods. It's just a manifestation of our own abuse against nature. Because, the reality is that humankind, including us here in Africa, but humankind generally, have been committing acts of terrorism against nature, against Mother Nature. And, she's reacting. It's as simple as that. We can't continue this onslaught against nature, against the environment, which is our very life support system, something that has been put together by God Almighty in His infinite wisdom and mercy. He has created a perfect system for us as human beings, and we're just destroying it, pumping millions and millions of tons of pollution into the atmosphere, into the seas, into the rivers. Of course, we're going to have this sort of reaction. And, the scientists have been saying for a long time that we should look out because it could get a lot worse.
Yeah, quite a dangerous situation if I put it that way. But Philip, from your perspective now, which areas would you say are usually susceptible to flooding?
Well, I first like to start with saying that I can't agree less with what Desmond has just mentioned. The kind of floods we have currently, we've had the kind starting in 2012. Like he said, we've had flooding, but the kind of dangerous floods we started witnessing, we started noticing some drastic change in 2012, and ever since, we've been having these issues. Well, to respond to your question, people living on floodplains, people living on by the river banks, River Niger, River Benue, people living in areas that are very, very congested and poor drains are more susceptible to these floods. If you notice, Lokoja, which is a confluent state, is one of the states most affected by this flood. It was seen, and I don't think I'm wrong, that Lokoja is actually the center of Nigeria. So we are talking about Kogi State. So you will see the level of flooding you have there, and then down to the Niger Delta area. There's massive flood in Delta State. There's massive flood in Anambra State. It's everywhere. So what we are seeing today is, like Desmond mentioned, nature is reacting to our carelessness.
And with this in mind, people we understand, Philip, people still understand. People live in the floodplain areas more than in the cities, which is deemed to be much safer. Why do people find it much easier to live in these areas that are dangerous to habitat, despite knowing that it isn't safe for living?
Well, you see, these areas we have mentioned, people have been there for generations. I think the responsibility is on the part of the government. Some of these people are fisher folks, some of them are farmers, some of them have farmlands in these areas. So I think it's the responsibility of government to do what government should do. The floodplains are not restricted to the areas we have mentioned. Even in the southwestern part of the country, Lagos, you have areas that are supposed to be green areas that have been blocked today. Lands have been sold. This kind of floodings, you also have it in Lekki, Ajah, Jakpor axis. Why? Because you also have a lot of activities, Atlantic City project, Lagos Lagoon, which is blocked. And so in Lekki, for instance, and the Jakpor area, it's like a basin. You have so many construction works along the Atlantic Ocean, and then you have the lagoon, which is also supposed to assimilate some water. A lot of activities also going on, and the pathways are blocked. So people will always be people. It is the responsibility of government to ensure that what should be done is done. I'll go further by saying, you see, what we are experiencing today, we've been warned many, many years. I heard the news, I heard someone saying the NEMA should look at the possibility of setting up IDP camps in higher grounds. We had early warning systems, at least NIMET warned as early as April, May that we are going to have heavy rains. So the question is, why is it that it is now that the state governments are talking about setting up IDP camps? These things should have been there. In 2012, when there was massive flood, that kind of disaster, there were plans, there were recommendations of what to do. Fortunately, I'm one of the people who visited some of these devastated areas, particularly around Lokoja, Anambra, and the Delta State. We've had too much of talk and no concrete action. Early warning systems are there now. In 2012, it was not there. But now you have NIME telling us 3 or 4 or 5 months before that we're going to have this. So why are the state governments not putting your measures in place? Why don't we have IDP camps that can actually assimilate the number of people that we see displaced? So these are some of the
speaking on the IDP camps now, Desmond, reacting to what Philip just pointed out now, he is suggesting, perhaps, the Emergency Management Agency create more grounds, create more IDP counts in higher grounds. But do you think that perhaps would be a better way to addressing a situation that seems to be perennial than more lasting?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And Phillips hit the nail on the head. I mean, in fairness to the meteorological people, they've been very good. They came out with the warnings way back. They've been doing their work. And, you need to be proactive. When they're giving you these kind of warnings, you need to set up the various camps and the places where the people will be able to be a little bit protected for a while, But you see, that's good, and we need to have that now. But the reality is that, prevention is better than what? Cure. Yes. And, this is a warning. Just recently, the Secretary General of the United Nations, he said 2 things. That's the current one, Guterres. He said, first thing, climate change is the biggest issue facing mankind now. And if we think of all the other problems we have, for him to say that, then he now also said, how many times will the alarm have to blow, have to ring before we take action? And also our very own Dr. Nimo Bassi has paraphrased exactly that. Nimo has been saying this for a long time now. And a lot of other wise men around the world have been saying, look, we are damaging this system. These things are just warnings. And as terrible as these floods are, as terrible as they are, if we continue this way, it'll just be child's play. I mean, Phillips was talking about, Lagos having issues, Lagos having problems. Yeah, it did. 2012 had problems, 2 years ago had major issues, but the kind of inundation underwater that Lagos could have, you can't even imagine it in your worst nightmare. Seas are rising, Oh, yeah, seas are rising. And then rivers are bringing far more water. All the rivers downstream, they come to Lagos. We're damaging the environment too much. We must change our attitudes. The alarm bells are blowing. So it's very good to have your IDPs. You need to have those ready, but we need to take far more proactive. Action.
Right, so let's hold your thought for now. We need to go on a very quick break. You're watching Africa Today, and we've been looking at the concerns with flooding in Nigeria and parts of Africa. Welcome back. Nigeria's rainy season, which typically runs between March and September, often brings with it nature's fury and inevitable flooding. At least 140 people were killed and tens of thousands forced to abandon their homes in 2012 in what became Nigeria's worst flooding in more than 5 decades. Well, I still have my guests with me, Philip Jakpor and Desmond Majekodunmi. Now, Desmond, let me quickly come to you now. You pointed out before we went on break the devastating effect of this flooding, if this flooding continues on end. But the president, that's Muhammadu Buhari of Nigeria, approved the release of 3 billion naira to NEMA for the purchase of medical and humanitarian supplies for victims. Is that enough? And what else measures can we do to, well, contain this problem?
Yeah. Yeah, great question. Absolutely great question. You know, as they say, money answers all things. But, to answer this kind of problem, you need a whole lot of money. At least, the money has been allocated. And I just pray to God Almighty that, it will be judiciously expended. Because we've had many, many instances when this sort of money is allocated and it's just squandered. This is very, very, very wrong. And talking about the money, a lot of this could have been alleviated way back if we'd used the money in the ecology fund. Nigeria has trillions and trillions of naira that is allocated to ecology fund, which is meant to help to ameliorate these sort of disasters. Because it's not just the climate change, it's not just the heavy rain, it's not just what we've done to the atmosphere. The streams and rivers themselves, they're silting up. There's sand pouring in there because we cut down all the forests, and forests have a role to protect the river beds from having erosion soil falling in there. So, this ecology fund could have actually helped a lot for reforestation, for sensitization of people. So definitely that money is not enough, but at least we thank God it is there, but it must be judiciously spent. They should be very, very careful how they use that money.
So, Philip, on your part, what would you say should be the best way we can handle this flooding situation on our hands?
Well, Mr. Desmond has hit the nail on the head. It goes beyond throwing money at the situation. Money, yes, very, very important. But if you recall, even in 2012, when we had this flooding, I think that was under the former president, Goodluck Jonathan. There was this think tank, technical group set up that had people like Dangote and the rest of them. You must ask yourself, these people came together in 2012. I think they made some recommendations, they did some things. What has happened between then and now? With what we see on ground, it's obvious nothing has happened. Ecology funds are diverted into politics. But we must look at some of the things we do which aggravates this climate chaos. Like he has continued to mention from the beginning. One of them, for instance, is our dependence on fossil fuels. Across the Niger Delta, for instance, you have these gas flares, from 24 hours every day, day and night, you have these flares. The gas flares have been noted as one of the largest contributors to climate change. We are still flaring gas. And so when you flare gas, excluding the pollutions of the rivers and streams like Mr. Majekodunmi has mentioned, these are some of the things that contribute to the climate chaos. I think as far back as 2005, 2006, there was this thing about gas gathering infrastructure so that we don't continue to heat up the atmosphere with the gas that is flared. To ask yourself today, how many years after, have we achieved anything with that so that we are not contributing to this chaos? Then ask yourself, government that is supposed to ensure that people don't build on floodplains, is the government actually doing that? Those who impugn on these laws, are they sanctioned? Are the drains open? So it's a whole lot of things. You can, throw money at the situation it's like the horse has run out and you have decided to, shut the door behind. That is what we are passing through today. Now, one critical thing you must also ask yourself is even the state of the IDP camps we are talking about. I remember in one of the IDP camps I visited at the time, you had about 100 families, and what you just had were 2 toilets there for 100 families. Now, imagine women, people who were physically challenged, sharing the same toilet. So at the end of the day, those IDP camps also turned out to be places where people can, contact some illnesses, diseases. So we have to look at a whole lot of things. It goes beyond just putting that money. What is that money going to do? Look at the River Niger axis. the rains are increasing, and the dams are overflowing. There's this thing about the Lagdo Dam in Cameroon, for instance, when it was built, I think in the 70s. And Nigeria is on the downside of where you have that dam. Now, the recommendation at that time was that Nigeria should also build some smaller dams that are supposed to be buffer, so that when waters are released from the Lagdo Dam, these smaller dams can assimilate them. That was, I think, 1979 or so. Have we done that? We have not. So now when water is released from the Lagdo Dam, so that the dam does not burst when it has too much water, it has to flow into these communities and continue this cycle of flooding.
Now, that
So
is really disturbing and worrying, Philip. But Desmond, from your own point of view, from what Philip just raised from his analysis with respect to the Cameroonian dam, which is expected to be open anytime soon and might flood in some states, some local governments in Taraba State in the north, how do you think we can prevent this recurring thing? Because definitely the dams will be open anytime whenever the waters are full. How do you think we can be able to curb this situation so we do not have to have lives being lost, properties being destroyed, and a whole lot of circle that keeps going on end?
Yeah, absolutely. And as Philip said, the solutions are there. I mean, we have, the right sort of people who are analyzing these things, and they've given the solutions from way back. One of the solutions is to have these smaller dams downstream so that the water can be contained, it can be diverted. But the overall solution, this is look, when people like Secretary General of United Nations are telling you something, you should listen, because it's a fool can never ever take that position. And he's not alone. People like Al Gore, people like even I would get so many of them. So many have told us. This is the defining issue for humanity. We need to get this into our consciousness. And in a way, it's a bit of a silver lining to this terrible dark cloud that is looming over us and our children. Because they have told us that if we allow this to continue much longer, there is a tipping point scenario, okay, where the whole process becomes, wait for this, irreversible and catastrophic. So we're looking for little solutions now, like dams and small this thing. Look, no kind of dam is going to be able to prevent the situation when it gets to that tipping point. We haven't got there yet, and this is the hopeful thing. But we have to get it through our minds that we, as human beings, we must evolve. We must change into a better character, a better personality. Otherwise, we shall drive ourselves into extinction. Look.
Yeah, and talking about better character, Desmond, I'm sorry for pausing, for coming in there. Talking about better character, what exactly are you looking at? What kind of practices do you think we as humans can adopt so we can have, a healthy living lifestyle?
Oh, I'm so glad you brought that out. And you know what? As my dear brother, and our brother Nimobasi, Reverend Dr. Nimobasi would tell you, it is all there in the scriptures. All the scriptures, the Quranic scriptures, the Christian scriptures, the Buddhist scriptures, it's all there. That we have to have a better attitude towards each other. You can spell it out in 4 letters, L-O-V-E, love our God. And if you love the God, then how can you destroy his creation? And if you're professing to love God, then you should be very careful that you're not just being a hypocrite, because the God you're professing to love said that man should care for his creation, because his creation is our life support system and our children's life support system. So you profess to love a God that said the creation is good, said you should care for it, and you're destroying the creation. This is very, very hypocritical. But I'm an optimist, and I believe that we shall evolve. And we shall start putting the common good ahead of the almighty profit margin. That we shall start prioritizing love and not greed, because that's what's brought us here. Philip brought a very, very good point out when he told us that we need to decarbonize. We never needed to use fossil fuel for our energy. Do you know that the sun provides in 1 hour enough energy for the whole world in a year. It's just we don't have the technology to tap it, but if we put 10% of the money that we put into fossil fuel and all this thing into the research of how to tap the sun's energy that comes to us in light and comes to us with winds and so on, we would have all the energy we need free of charge. There has to be a change. And what put us down this road of poisoning the atmosphere? Greed. And we knew it's poison. There's nobody. Okay, let me ask you, would you lock yourself up in a room with your generator running?
Absolutely not.
Not. Yeah, right, because you're burning is poison. Every car we have on our streets is burning the same poison. We got to stop this and change.
Absolutely, I agree with you. So, Philip, for your own closing remarks, what would you have to say to add to what Desmond just pointed out?
There's nothing to add. He has said it all. Let's look at the oil economy,
right?
Fossil fuel economy, the clean energy economy. That's the way to go.
Right, all right, and that's a fine way to leave it right now. Thank you very much, Philip Jakpor and Desmond Majekodunmi. It's a pleasure to have your thoughts and analysis on Africa today.
Thank you very much. Okay, bye.
While the poor in Africa are most at risk in times of flooding, the latest after effects of extreme weather global warming come as a serious warning as to what the destiny of natural disasters could be like in the coming years. So with hands on deck and eyes on the future, Africa and the world must take action by implementing eco-friendly policies and building sustainable communities that would keep humanity both in good and bad times. And that is our package for tonight. But don't forget to join the conversation as usual on Twitter at TVC News NG and follow me for updates around Africa at Esther TVC News. Until the next one, I am Esther Omokwariola, and always remember, Africa can only get better.